Hello, everybody. Welcome in. Today is day 4 of the reset. I am so excited to be here with you all and getting to the final day, which is tomorrow of the reset. It's been such a fun ride and I have enjoyed it so very much. I was messaging back and forth with one of our challengers this week, and it was just good for my soul because it felt good to connect with someone working through this. It's always fun to know when people are being intentional and wanting to make changes. And it's just kind of, a rising tide lifts all boats. And I just love having conversations with y'all in the DMs and through email or however we connect. But I wanted to check in with you guys all on day 4, and we're going to talk about how to really activate what we've been putting into practice from Monday with our thought loops, Tuesday with our margin audit, yesterday with our calling. And today I'm calling it activation, right? Because we are going to put things into motion. So, all this week, we've been really working on getting to the nuts and bolts of the thought loop that we've been stuck in, this analysis paralysis, or just really just lack of motion and movement in the things that we're trying to accomplish and work on and make changes for in our life. And these are all good things. And sometimes we just need a boost to get where we're going. But you could have all the knowledge in the world and have all the best intentions, but there often is a gap that some of us stay in between the knowing and the doing. Raise your hand if you've been there because I most certainly have. And today's whole exercise is really helping facilitate closing that gap between the knowing and the doing because we don't want to live in that paralysis phase. Let me get my screen sharing here. Is that it? Yes, it is. Okay. I hope you all can see that. Please let me know if you can. Let me get my notes pulled back up here. Where'd they go? There they are. Perfect. Thank you for your patience. Okay. So we are going to be rolling into talking about how do we identify what is keeping us from taking the action. There's a specific paralysis that most of us who are feeling called and committed and excited to do, and that's really where it looks like, you know, a lot of preparation, planning, waiting for the right time, refining the idea one more time. It can look like wisdom and being discerning, but from the inside, it feels like you can't really take the next step. You're not 100% sure why not, right? And that's what I want to help us get to the bottom of because there are many times that what we think may be keeping us stuck is actually not that. So we're going to dig into this today because I want to help you guys get where you're going. And just for reference, our lives are times for you to ask questions, to be in the chat, communicate, connecting with each other. And the lesson for today was emailed to you, and it goes into much more depth. So if you haven't if you haven't had time to check out the lesson yet, make sure to go do that because there's a lot more. And we kind of breeze through these slides because I want to have discussion with you guys if you're able to make it live. And so that's just a little caveat. Make sure to go through the lesson today because you'll get more out of it than just the live call right now. So we are working on getting out of this mysterious phase and gap of knowing and doing, right? What is the offer you need to do? What is the email you need to send? The conversation you need to have, the thing you need to publish, or the next action you take, the call you need to make. And sometimes we just can't take it, right? And so I feel like I use this analogy a lot, like God can't steer a parked car. And I've said that a lot of times this week. And so we're trying to get our car in motion. So I don't know if you guys already can easily identify what's a yes or a no that you're not taking a step. Drop it in the chat if you know that there's a step you're not taking yet. Yes or no? And here's what took me years to understand. That paralysis isn't like a discipline problem. It's really not tied to a calling problem. Are there going to be times where God calls us to wait? Certainly. And we should work on our thought loops and our margins and our calling exercise we did yesterday to help us parse that out because sometimes it is a season of wait, rest, and silence. But you can also be an active listener, right? And it's not necessarily a faith problem. Most times, most often, it's a fear problem. And sometimes we think like fear, ooh, big scary monster. But fear shows up and uh, camouflages itself in many different types of actions and emotions. So I wanted to point those out for us. Dr. Caroline Leaf is a neuroscientist and she's a Christian. And she's done enough research to show that the amygdala, the part of the brain that processes threat, can't tell the difference between a physical danger and a psychological risk. So the threat of feeling feels identical to the threat of physical harm. And so when you take a step, your brain isn't like malfunctioning. It's really doing what it was built to do, which is to protect you from a threat. And the problem is the threat in this circumstance is real, but it's not there's no danger to it. So you might fail, it might not work, but those outcomes are just simply uncomfortable. They're not dangerous. It's not threatening your physical being. And the amygdala does not know the difference between that. So that's an interesting side note to understand about your brain. That's why there's so many other productivity and inspirational coaches out there. And one in particular, I want to say it's Mel Robbins. And she always has like the take five. So her whole thing is once you make a decision, count to 5 and go do it. Like, give yourself no other option to do it, and that's gonna help you, like, just get into action without getting paralyzed by your brain, because your brain's first response is, "Ooh, this is different. This isn't good. Let's wait. Let's think about it more." Second Timothy 1:7 says, "God did not give us a spirit of fear, but of power and love and a sound mind." And sometimes we think, "Well, I I still am scared. I still do have fear and doubt and all those things. But the power of it is that God gives us the power to handle it. And so it helps for me to understand like my first natural instinct is going to be, oh, I can do that later, or oh, let me work up to that. We get nerves about different things. Some of us don't like to talk in front of people, whatever it might be, can activate that fear signal, and then that keeps you kind of paralyzed. So I wanted to quickly go through some of these fears, and it just helps you to see, like, oh, that might be exactly what I'm struggling with. So the fear of being seen, that's pretty obvious. The visibility invites judgment. So staying small feels like protection, like not going all the way with your idea. I can relate to this with my podcast because I have so many ideas for my podcast, but sometimes it feels like it might be a little too fringe of a subject, or maybe people will just being vulnerable about different topics. And so I know that I was called to do that, but I'm also not putting my full self out there because of that judgment, that it feels better to just play it safe, play it small. And then you have fear of failure, not the practical like fallout, but the story of failure would seem to confirm. Like, see, I told you I wasn't built for this. I wasn't made to do this. I can't handle it. I'm not good enough. I'm not pretty enough. I'm not strong enough, whatever it might be. So it really, the fear of failure, apart from just what might happen, it's the inner critic of what that means. And that's what is such a problem for most people to face, because confidence takes practice, and confidence is a buildup to what you're doing and how you're doing it. And then you have the fear of success. So honestly, this one is a challenge because people don't recognize that sometimes success is scary. Hold on one second, guys. Sorry, everyone. I have a 4-year-old. Okay, so fear of success. This one can be hard because sometimes we think like it would be great if all that happened, if all that worked out. But really, the reality is that is not what is sometimes what we're ready for, right? And so we have to have this idea that like we have to be accepting of that, the more responsibility, the more expectation of it. And that can be scary, like everyone wants to go viral these days, but think about millions of people seeing something, and maybe it's something that you decide to share that's vulnerable and you can't manage that, right? And so it just feels like it's too much of that going on out there. And so success can keep you back. And then you have the fear of being wrong. So what if I misheard God? This one keeps really deeply faithful people frozen because it's this endless discernment cycle instead of movement, right? You don't want to get it wrong, but God redeems everything, right? How many people in scripture got things wrong, did it the wrong way, didn't follow God's instruction? That is so hard to wrestle with, and no one wants to be wrong. And then that leads into just the fear of disappointing God, right? So it's really rooted in this transactional theology. It's like God's favor is only on us if we're doing it right, getting it right. But that's not true. We know that. We know that we are saved by grace and that there's nothing we could do to earn our salvation. That was only accomplished through the crucifixion of Jesus. And so that releases that because we know that we are in communion with the Lord when we believe in Jesus Christ. And so that can hold us back if we're not careful about what we're saying that means about our faith, right? So I'm curious if any of you have seen yourself in any of these fears, if you've seen how they've played out, because this is really going to be eye-opening for you to see, okay, I've been operating in one of these areas and it's time to let go. It's time to pray over that. It's time to be more intentional about managing that fear because God did tell us not to live in fear. The Holy Spirit is with us, right? God's strength and power is behind us. So once we've figured that out, we've been kind of working through this idea of what does calling mean and having to have this certainty. We talked about this a little bit yesterday. And I think a lot of us feel like, oh, if we know what we're supposed to do, we shouldn't be fearful. We shouldn't have a racing heart. We shouldn't feel uncomfortable. But that's not true. Scripture tells us a different story. Moses argued with God when he was assigned to go and let free the Israelites from the Egyptians. He's like, I have a stutter. I can't do this. He, got angry and broke the tablets. I mean, like, he had anger issues, right? He didn't do everything perfect. Did God still use him? Yes. Did God love him? Yes. Gideon needed a sign after sign after sign before he felt like, yes, I know God wants me to do that. Esther was scared, but she resolved that if she were to die, that's okay because she was doing what she felt was needed. I mean, who isn't scared of what could happen, right? Jeremiah said, I'm too young. I don't know how to speak. Peter stepped out of the boat and immediately started to sink, but he tried. He was willing to go and take an action. So not one of them moved with this fearless certainty. They moved still afraid, and God met them in the movement, not before it. Joshua 1:9 doesn't say, wait until you're not afraid. It says, be strong and courageous, which assumes that there's something to be brave in the face of, right? The command not to fear is given to people who are afraid. So it's not, your faith isn't diminished by having those thoughts, but you need to take action, right? And be obedient in that because God is going to work through you. And that's the journey that you get to take. And so we have some exercises from this lesson, and we're going to work through those so that we can really identify what it is, what's going on, and how can we change our thought loop around it, hearkening back to Monday's training about thought loops. And this is why this is like a challenge that builds upon itself. And so I hope you guys have the time to go back and listen to every lesson. So the first part is name the fear, not fear of failure, but the specific version. I'm afraid that if I launch this and it flops, it'll confirm I was never really called to this. You can't take captive a fear that you haven't named. So you need to go through what is the type of fear. And then the cross-examine it like a lawyer. What's the actual and verifiable evidence this fear is true? This is very similar to the awake framework we talked about on Monday with our thought loops. What's the actual evidence? What's the actual facts about this? Write that counter evidence down and what God has already done, what he's already provided, what he's already opened the door to. You're building a new thought tree alongside figuring out where you're going to go and how you're going to take those steps. And then part 3 is really the 3 scenarios. Oops, I went too fast. Part 3 is worst case, best case, and most likely case. I like to do this because it helps me let go of the anxiousness I'm having. It helps me really identify what type of fear I'm living in. So the first one would be worst case, like what's the worst thing that could possibly happen if I do this, if I take this action? And then what's that absolute best case, like pie in the sky? This is exactly what would come to fruition if I had it my way. And then the most likely case, which is almost pretty close to kind of what you could handle, right? It's not a catastrophe. It's not some overnight transformation, but it's this compounding movement. Every small action leads to big change over time. It's like when you're going following a compass and you get 1 degree off, you end up way over here just by 1 degree, perpetually going in that direction. So if you keep taking steps, you're going to get to a different destination than where you are now. The change will be there. And so the fourth step is really identifying the single step. So it's not the whole A to Z plan, it's not the entire blueprint, but it's the smallest action that moves you toward your calling. And this is like what I want you to really get out of today's exercise is putting it on the calendar. Like you're going to name it and you're going to put it on your calendar and you're going to give yourself time margin that we work through from day 2. You're going to have margin now because you're recognizing what are the things that you're overloading yourself with that you need to let go of, what are things that you can change. And so you're going to make the space for this to live. So it's your turn to identify what that is and put it down. It's a scheduled step that will actually happen. So what is that step? What's the step you've been avoiding? What is coming up for you that you're like, yeah, that's pretty much exactly what I need to get done. And I can at least start there and then go from there. And why this works is because Dr. Lee found that small repeated intentional actions build stronger neural pathways than these big dramatic gestures. One step this week produces more momentum than 10 steps planned but never taken. How many of you have started a project, you write the whole list down, and just the fact that that list is so big, you put it off, right? Because you're thinking, I need 12 hours to get all that done. But the reality is, you don't have to get all that done in one 12-hour sitting, right? You can pick away at it little by little and get to that finish line, the last check off. I overload myself constantly. So this is something that I really had to practice what I preach because I tend to have a lot more idealistic expectations of myself. But I've learned over the course of my entrepreneurship journey over these last 13 years that I have to recognize what season I'm in. And this goes back to yesterday. Truly, what is God calling me to do in this season? He can call you to hold more than one thing at a time. Most of us are because a lot of us have multiple responsibilities, either work, kids, taking care of someone we love, helping our church, whatever it might be that are things that we are to do in the season, but that doesn't mean like you don't have other things. And so it's really about just recognizing that I can start and be faithful and intentional and praying over each thing that I'm working on and being receptive to what God is calling me to do for that day. In Ezekiel 47, there's the depiction of the water flowing, right? At first it's just ankle deep and then it gets to be a full river. So once that first step produces even the smallest evidence of movement, your brain starts to register that there's a reward, there's a dopamine release. The amygdala, the part of your brain that's like, okay, we need to conserve, preserve, all those things kind of quiets down because it starts to feel not so overwhelming, right? Once you start to get some things off your list, you're like, dang, that didn't take me as long as I thought it would, right? And so the next step gets more exciting and easier because you're excited about the progress you're making. So it's momentum isn't something like you're born with, this intrinsic motivation. It's something that you learn. It's a state, it's a practice that you activate once you start taking action. And that's my biggest encouragement for today is to start taking action. Tomorrow, day 5, is the last day of our reset challenge. And it's one that's going to help you formulate an idea of how to make all of this sustainable so that the renewed mind doesn't fade, the margin doesn't start to quietly fill back up, and you stall out on your momentum. And we're going to be talking about how we can sustain this momentum so that we can see the progress that we're trying to focus on for this week. That's where I want to leave you with today's live. I want to encourage you to make sure that you go back through the lesson today and really dig into these exercises and these questions at the end to help you know what you're doing. And then I'm going to post in our community chat on Substack. I'm going to ask you what your next step is. I would love for you to respond to that. And as always, please reach out with questions. If you want some feedback about what you're thinking, just to bounce it off somebody else, I'm here for you. This community is here for you. And I'm so excited with what this reset is producing for so many of you that I've heard from already. And I hope that I can hear from any of you that haven't shared anything yet. Please send me any testimonials you have. That will be so helpful for me for upcoming trainings and cohorts that will be launching together in our Bold Life community. And I'm excited. I'm excited for what tomorrow is going to bring. So make sure you show up, you get today's lesson completed, and you'll be here live tomorrow. I'll talk to you soon, everyone. Bye for now.